Today, our attorneys sent a letter to all 31 members of the Texas Senate and the Lieutenant Governor with an accompanying affidavit and evidence that refutes Mr. Dorfman's misleading testimony. The impeachment process is over, but we are not going away. We are not going away. For us, this case has always been about more than money. It's about truth. It's about justice. And although political pressure may have thwarted justice this month, we will continue our fight. Anyone who watched the impeachment trial knows that the House managers presented ample evidence of Ken Paxton's criminal conduct. They presented evidence that Ken Paxton continually and repeatedly used the power of his office to benefit Nate Paul by circumventing the open records process, by interfering in Paul's litigation with the charitable trust, by issuing a rushed opinion that Paul used to try and prevent foreclosure of his properties, by ordering OAG Enforcement Division to investigate FBI agents, state securities officials, and even the federal magistrate judge that were investigating Paul. And when those seasoned law enforcement officers, including Ranger David Maxwell, refused, Ken Paxton personally hired a 5-year lawyer that Paul directed to harass his many civil and criminal adversaries. And the House presented evidence that Paul remodeled Paxton's house for him. Paxton only paid for Paul's work after Paxton learned we, the whistleblowers, went to law enforcement. The $120,000 invoice was created after Paxton paid for it, and months after he had moved in the house. Paul even paid for an Uber account that Dave P., also known as Attorney General Ken Paxton, used to visit his mistress. And Paul gave Paxton's mistress a job so she could move to Austin. The House also put on ample evidence that when it came to Paul, Paxton refused to heed the advice of the principled conservative staff that he put in place, and when that staff was forced to go to law enforcement, Paxton fired them or ran them off. Ken Paxton still has not testified under oath. He didn't even attend most of his impeachment trial. In our suit, he will have to testify, or he will have to plead the fifth in open court. If the Supreme Court sends our case back to district court, we expect several things to be different from the political trial we just witnessed. Let's go over a few of those. Our judge will not receive a multi-million-dollar donation from Paxton supporters on the eve of trial. Our jurors will not have their careers overtly threatened. The jury will see evidence that the House managers were prohibited from introducing in the impeachment trial, like this receiver's report I can share with you. This report, filed in one of Nate Paul's bankruptcy cases, shows that the contractor on Paxton's house, Raj Kumar, is a convicted felon who has assisted Nate Paul in fraud. We will be able to depose Senator Angela Paxton about what she knew about the renovations of her home by Nate Paul. Laura Olson will have to testify under oath or plead the fifth in open court. Nate Paul will have to testify or plead the fifth. Raj Kumar will have to testify or plead the fifth. And most importantly, Ken Paxton will have to testify under oath or plead the fifth in open court. We will fight for justice in this case as long as it takes. We will also keep the public, the media, and the Texas legislature apprised of our litigation in real time. We will document each frivolous delay that Ken Paxton engages in to continue hiding from the truth. Delays which will just cost the taxpayers more in the long run than they would have spent if the settlement had been finalized this session. Finally, and importantly, we would like to thank the 121 members of the House and 14 members of the Senate who oppose corruption in state government, and give special thanks to Republican Senators Hancock and Nichols for not wilting under political pressure and enabling Ken Paxton's lawlessness. This has been an incredibly difficult 3 years on our families, but we're strengthened by the book of John where Jesus said, "The truth will set you free." Now I'm happy to take a few questions from the media something that Ken Paxton never does.
Mr. Brickman, there was...
And sorry, if I could interrupt you, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself so I know who you are and who you're from.
We heard during the impeachment process there was already a little bit of a hesitancy to settle this lawsuit. Are you concerned at all that given the outcome of how this impeachment trial, that Mr. Paxton was acquitted, are you concerned at all that that was the best deal you were going to get as far as the settlement goes?
I'm not at all concerned about that. I think that when we're in a real court and get a real judgment, it's very different than having a jury of 30 members of political parties. So no, I'm not.
Sir, this is John Burton from the Whistleblower Network. Are you suggesting that you don't want a settlement, that you want to go to court, or a settlement is still on the table?
It's possible they could still fund the settlement, but we've been given zero indication that that's likely to happen, and we're ready to go back to our trial court and get a judgment and hold Ken Paxton to justice.
Any updates you can give?
If you could.
Sorry, Taylor Goldstein, PC Chronicle. Any updates you can give on the state of the FBI investigation?
That's really not something I can spend much time talking about. I can tell you that it's ongoing, and I can also tell you that lost in this entire conversation about the criminal investigation into Ken Paxton is one really important thing. Well, really two important things. The first is this investigation started when Donald Trump was president. We went to the FBI in September of 2020. Donald Trump was president then. These allegations come from the top 8 people in Ken Paxton's office. So for him to claim that this is some political witch hunt when the investigation started when Donald Trump was president and was made by the 3 of us and our 5 of our other colleagues is absolutely ludicrous.
Monica Madden, KXAN News. Conservatives have latched onto this idea that you're not paying your attorneys, that there might be some benefit going on. Any update on payment for who's helping you in this lawsuit?
Yeah, our attorneys are on a, first of all, I can't speak for my colleagues, but I can tell you my attorneys are on a contingency fee, so they will be paid. The idea that anyone is doing pro bono work for us, whether it's our civil lawyers or Mr. Sutton. I couldn't watch the trial, Monica, but I heard after the fact that Paxton's lawyers made a big deal about this. It's ludicrous. It's a total sideshow, like everything else that happened in the trial. Ken Paxton has never answered questions about how is he paying his own lawyers. I mean, it's ridiculous.
I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on how the prosecutors prosecuted the case. Did you think they did a good job? Do you think there was something they should have done differently in order to maybe sway some additional senators to vote to come back?
Yeah.
Could I answer that?
Please.
I'm Mark Penley. You know what? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, there we go. No, I want to say something. Thank you for your question. That's an excellent question. We want to thank the House and their team of investigators and the House Investigations Committee, first of all, for starting the investigation back in early March, as far as we know. All of us gave statements to the House Investigations team. And at trial, an issue was made of whether those statements were under oath. They were not under oath. But I want to say this. All of us testified at trial under oath. The other side had the transcripts of our statements that were given to the House investigating attorneys. Did any of us get impeached on any material fact? They had those transcripts. And number 2, we are grateful to the entire House team, the Investigations Committee, their attorneys, to Mr. Hardin, to Mr. DeGuerin, and their entire staffs. They were wonderful to work with. They tried very, very hard to get the whole story out for the benefit of the people of Texas. And I want to reiterate something Blake said. This case is about truth. It's about getting the story out. And this is something we feel very, very strongly about. The Office of Attorney General is critical. That's the top attorney in state government. That's the official that's supposed to enforce and uphold and respect the law. We saw personally, with our own personal knowledge, that Ken Paxton would not obey the limits of the law. He would not stay within the guardrails, the boundaries of the law. And that's why we went to the FBI and made personal eyewitness reports on September 30th, 2020. The House team, the entire team of attorneys, did their very best to get that story out, and we're grateful for that. And if our lawsuit continues, if the legislature elects not to fund the settlement, and that's up to them. It's not up to us. If they fund it, that would be great. If they choose not to, what I'm saying today is I'm ready, and I believe my colleagues are, ready to go back to State District Court here in Travis County and continue with our litigation, to take depositions, to do discovery, to try the case to 12 citizens of Travis County and show that the Office of Attorney General broke the Whistleblower Act. And they will not admit that. At trial, they came up with all sorts of excuses. But here's what I want to say today. Isn't it amazing that 8 top-level people in a state agency that had personal contact with the Attorney General found it necessary to go to the FBI and report our boss, the Attorney General, for breaking the law and for not being willing to engage in ethical conduct. And amazingly, within 45 days, all 8 of us were gone. 5 of us were fired, 3 were treated with disrespect and elected to resign. But all 8 whistleblowers were gone within 45 days. And we believe that when we get to try our case to a jury, the jury will agree with us that the Office of the Attorney General violated the Whistleblower Act. Thank you.
Do you have any, Robert Down with Texas, do you guys have any thoughts on Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick's comments that followed immediately after the impeachment proceedings?
I had never seen anything like that, and I clerked for a federal judge. I've been in trials. I have never witnessed in my life a judge directly upon a verdict making a statement like that. It was shocking.
You mentioned the $3 million in loans and donations. I mean, to what degree do you think, that influenced his, the way he presided over the trial?
Robert, I don't have an opinion to that, but here's what I know. I know the facts. I know that Lieutenant Governor Patrick, at his sole discretion, was the decider that Ken Paxton did not have to testify, that Laura Olson did not have to testify. Those were 2 huge things that happened at the trial.
Well, it's up to the legislature whether to fund the settlement, and so I leave that to their discretion. All I'm saying is if they elect not to fund the settlement, the one-page mediated settlement agreement is contingent upon funding. If there's no
and a longer agreement.
Yeah, and that's a very important point Blake is making. That document that both sides signed says the parties agreed to negotiate and formalize and sign a longer formal settlement agreement. We told the OAG that the funding had to be this year. They would not agree to that. They would not put it in. So the longer settlement document that was contemplated by the one-page settlement document was never signed, and that was their choice. So to answer your question, speaking for myself, if the legislature chooses to fund it, that's great. If they choose not to fund it, then we're asking the Supreme Court to rule and let us go back to the district court.
Question for you, Mr. Ambassador, again, not to matter for the case. And all of you were mocked by Paxton's defense team, but you in particular seem to take a lot of heat for the no evidence remark, which I know prosecutors later tried to clarify. First, just on an emotional level, any response to the way you were talked about by defense attorneys, and then also, do you regret having said the no evidence, or would you clarify again what you meant for those people who were
I'm going to answer that question because Ryan Vassar, through this process, has become a dear friend of mine and a colleague, and Tony Busby is classless. What he did at that trial was classless. Ryan Vassar and all of us knew when we went to law enforcement on September 30th, 2020, we took firsthand eyewitness evidence to the FBI. The idea that Tony Busby or Ken Paxton think that the top 8 people in his agency going and sitting around a round table at the FBI and telling them their first-person accounts is not evidence is proof of how absurd Paxton's point was in this whole trial. And what he did to my colleagues was shameful, and Tony Busby should be ashamed of himself. He's a disgrace.
Well, and I'd like to add something, if I may, Ryan. When Ryan was on the stand and got emotional, Ryan was thinking about his children. He was asking how this had impacted his family. He's a father with 4 small children and a wife who stays at home and raises those kids. When he got fired, he had a newborn baby at home and 4 young children. And Ryan was unemployed for 6 months. So did anybody talk about that from the defense side in the trial? Did they care about that? No. And I agree with Blake. It's shameful to mock somebody who's been through what we've been through, but particularly Ryan, because being out of work with a family at home to feed and a newborn baby, everybody can understand how hard that would be and how emotional that would be. Ryan's a human being just like we all are. This past 3 years has been extremely difficult. All we're asking for is for people to recognize what Ken Paxton did. We came to open court in the Senate. We took the oath. We testified. We told what we saw and what we knew and what Ken Paxton said and what he did. We told our account of his wrongdoing. Ken Paxton didn't even attend most of the proceeding. And I echo what Blake said. When does Ken Paxton go under oath? When does he come give a press conference to any media members who want to show up and ask direct questions from people who are educated on the evidence? He's out doing radio talk shows and going to friendly venues where he knows people will ask him non-threatening questions, where he won't be pressed on the evidence, where he won't be asked about what Blake said. Why did he start making efforts to pay Raj Kumar of Cupertino Builders? And Raj Kumar is an admitted business associate of Nate Paul's. Why did Ken Paxton start trying to pay him on the day that we had sent Brandon Kamek a cease and desist letter? Why did Ken Paxton have his blind trust make the payment on the day that we gone to the FBI? That's an amazing coincidence, isn't it? Will Ken Paxton come and do a press conference with all of you and with any other media members in Texas that want to ask questions, that want to look at the 4,000 pages of evidence that were filed on the Senate website by the House team? They worked hard all summer to gather all that evidence. Is Ken Paxton ever going to be pressed for answers about the facts in those records? There are extensive records about this. We stand behind our testimony. We challenge Ken Paxton to go in a neutral venue with the media members who know what they're talking about, who study the documents, who can ask probing follow-up questions, instead of him going and just asking, going to friendly venues, getting softball questions, and not being pressed for details. That's what he does. We stand behind our testimony, and what we want is justice. And we want the people of Texas to have an attorney general that acts with integrity and good public policy. And I'd like to echo something Senator Kelly Hancock said in an interview last week. The people of Texas deserve both good public policy with integrity. And that's not too much to ask of an elected official, except in the case of Ken Paxton.
I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Phil?
We don't have anything to say about that. That's out of our control. So,
All we can say is it's ongoing, but we can't comment more than that.
yeah.
Phil?
One of the defense's witnesses, I think his name was Austin Kilhorn, when he was questioned, there was some confusion about who the state employees worked for, the people of Texas or Ken Paxton, the man. I was just curious about what you guys thought about that.
Yeah, I'll answer that because that came up the day I got fired. The current first assistant, Brent Webster, asked me that very question: who did I think I worked for? I said I worked for the state of Texas and the people of Texas, and that's the only correct answer. He told me he thought I was wrong. He thought I worked for Ken Paxton. We work for a boss as long as that boss stays within the law and within the rules of ethics. But when a boss goes out of bounds on the law and the rules of ethics, our loyalty is owed to the state and the people. And all 8 of us took that stand. We took it on principle. We weren't trying to manufacture a lawsuit. We weren't making anything up, despite some of the claims by the defense team in here. And we challenged them to show anything we said in there in our allegations about Ken Paxton's wrongdoing that's false. Thank you.
Mr. Brett Nelson with Texan. Which of the articles of impeachment do you think were strongest going into this?
The abuse of office, I think or the unfitness for office, I think was the strongest. That's basically a roll-up of everything that Ken Paxton did for Nate Paul and everything that Nate Paul did for Ken Paxton. I thought that was the strongest, but there were several other ones. If I had to pick one, I think it was one of the later articles, but Ken Paxton is definitely unfit for office. The fact that 16 Republican senators think that the behavior that Ken Paxton has done to this state the last 3 years is the new model that we should live by is why we're fighting this lawsuit. It's why we will not give up, because we cannot allow this state to be corrupt. And as a conservative Republican who has been in the trenches for basically 20 years of conservative Republican politics, Ken Paxton is not my standard bearer. And I will keep fighting to make sure that our party does not become the party of corruption.
Were you all actually engaged in political efforts in the field when you got the re-election?
I was not.
No.
No, really? When it comes to the re-election?
We'll cross that bridge when we get there.
You mentioned other evidence or materials that you think should come out that wasn't introduced in the impeachment trial that should come out in the trial court, like the receiver's report. Is there other material or evidence that you believe is be a strong part in the trial case that we haven't seen yet?
There is, and I think the House managers may know some of that, and I'll defer to them on whether they provide that to you, but there were other subpoenas where they did not get documents back that they should have, but I will defer to the very capable House managers to answer those questions.
Can you say more about what the nature of that was, or is that involving payments, or?
I can't.
Mr. Brickman, you had some of the strictest terms going into the settlement, and some of that included even an apology. Do you think, given this verdict, some of those terms, you might not be able to get from the other side? Does that impact whether you, go along with settlement?
The apology, Taylor, was very important to me because I stood on principle that I want to make sure that any public official in the state of Texas, this never happens to them again. So I think the fact that Ken Paxton apologized for calling us rogue employees, the fact that he was willing to put in the preliminary agreement that we acted in a way we thought was right was very significant to show his culpable state of mind about how he's treated us for the last 3 years, going on all these radio talk shows, making up absurd lies. And he never gets questioned on it because, like Mark said earlier, he will never come do this. We will stand here for 2 hours if we wanted to, but we're not going to do that today. In fact, we're going to wrap up soon. But we are open books. We want, this entire time, we have wanted full transparency. Ken Paxton's legacy is the exact opposite of that. He will never do this.
But does that affect your willingness to go forward with settlement if you don't get some of those terms?
Potentially. It does.
Marilyn, listen to CBS News. I wanted to ask, have you faced any personal threats since this has come out? Would you expect us to see the trial? Would you expand on that at all?
I have not.
I've not.
Are you all worried about a chilling effect on any state employee in Texas who might need to report potential wrongdoing?
Absolutely. And I think that there are two very dangerous precedents that came out of this impeachment trial that I think those 16 Republican senators really need to think long and hard about. The first is, why would any public employee ever report their boss for wrongdoing based on how we've been treated for 3 years? It sends a chilling effect. The second piece, which I think has been overlooked a little bit, is Brent Webster, who's the first assistant, and Attorney General Ken Paxton, in February of 2021, went to a Senate Finance Committee, and Chairman Huffman asked a very specific question: who hired Brandon Kamek? Ken Paxton did what he usually does and said, "Here, Brent, you answer this question." And then Brent sat there for 2 minutes, I think the testimony was played in the trial, and flat out lied to the Senate Finance Committee, and I guess every member of the Senate, and the House for that matter. And the precedent from that is you can go in a Senate committee and lie, and there is no consequence. That is very dangerous. Very, very dangerous precedent. One more.
I have a follow-up, sorry, about the mechanics of this lawsuit. So, looking ahead, let's say the legislature decides not to fund the settlement. They have decided not to, at least in this past session. And you end up winning this lawsuit, and a court decides, or a jury decides that, in fact, the Attorney General violated the Whistleblower Act. What are you going to get out of it? Will you be able to get some money
the two big things you get are your damages and your legal fees. The latter one is very important, and everyone watching should pay attention to this. If the Texas Supreme Court sends this back to trial, and if we go for years, the legal fees in this case are going to far exceed $3.3 million. And that brings up another point that has come out here as well. OAG is represented in this case by a firm called Lewis Brisbois, specifically an attorney named Bill Helfland. They've billed, I think, $600,000 in this case. And when Chris Hilton was in front of a House committee talking about this, he said, well, we had to hire outside counsel because there's some conflict in the office. That's not true. Judge Stone, who is, I think, the Solicitor General, is on the pleadings in this case, is working on this case. OAG has represented itself many times in the past in whistleblower cases. So the idea that OAG has to hire outside counsel in this case is just not true.
What about the granted countertops? Do you think the allegation that the defense definitively disproved that allegation would pro quo the kitchen remodel?
Here's what I know about the kitchen remodel. When we went to law enforcement on September 30th, we knew that Nate Paul was involved in the renovations of Ken Paxton's home. What we know now is the day after we went to the FBI, Ken Paxton wired $121,000 based on an invoice which was not even available then, sent to a company that's affiliated with Nate Paul, that's run by a guy named Raj Kumar, who's a convicted felon, who's done fraudulent transfers for Nate Paul. So when I hear these 16 Republican senators talk about there's no evidence or there's no smoking gun, that makes absolutely no sense. Ken Paxton was trying to cover up what we alleged by that payment. Whether they were granite countertops or not, I have no idea. Last question.
Mr. Griffin, Hayden's works with the Texan. He talks a lot about the Republican senators who voted against impeachment. What is your message to them after they sat through the trial and heard the evidence and then arrived at their belief that the standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt is not met?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
What would you say to senators who decided that the evidence presented at trial did not meet the standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt?
I would say I strongly disagree with that for the reasons I just mentioned, specifically with that one invoice. But I think their vote in history will be talked about 20 years from now as a vote condoning corruption. So thank you all very much.
Let me add one thing, Blake, if I may. I just want to make this one additional statement. Ken Paxton has made statements in the past that this was some sort of a deep state conspiracy, that people infiltrated us into his office to set this up. He said that on the radio or some version of that again last week. That is absolutely untrue. This had nothing to do with politics by any of us. What this had to do with was we saw his illegal and unethical behavior. We had a duty, we had a responsibility to report it to law enforcement. He would not listen to us. We met with him, we talked to him, we emailed him, we spoke to him on the phone. I met with him in person for over 2 hours on September the 26th. And then we went to the FBI on September 30th when we found out that the 5-year lawyer he had hired had gotten 39 grand jury subpoenas, and that Nate Paul and his attorney were actively directing him to go after Nate Paul's adversaries, and he was serving those grand jury subpoenas on federal authorities, state authorities, and Nate Paul's litigation opponents. Politics had absolutely nothing to do with any of this. This is about principle. This is about respect for the law. This is about upholding the law. And I have 7 honorable colleagues. We went together. We made our report together for 4 hours. The idea that we had no evidence, when Ryan answered that question, he answered it the way anybody might answer it. Did we take a box of documents? Did we take DNA tests? Did we take fingerprints? No. We went in a hurry because of what was going on with those 39 grand jury subpoenas. It was improper, it was unethical, it was illegal. And we had to make a report, and we had to make it that day. We had eyewitness testimony, we had personal knowledge. That's admissible evidence in any court in Texas. We took that to the FBI. We did our duty, and we've been waiting 3 years for justice because we've been illegally fired. Thank y'all for being here.